Rambling Canuck, back for another video. Today's video is going to be the second part of the What If series. With me is Han Star. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you, Canuck?
Not too bad. Can't complain too much. Nobody listens. So today what we're gonna do is we're gonna tackle the big one. What if D-Day failed? Which, on the face of it, doesn't seem like a big thing or that it could actually have happened. But as you go back and look at D-Day, you realize just how easily D-Day could have completely gone to hell. And the ramifications of D-Day failing, is just insane. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's easy to, like you said, to just look at it on the surface and say, oh yeah, they sent a lot of people over there, but there's so many moving parts that were involved. And if one little moving part had not worked, they could have got pushed back to the sea. And you're like, well, what would have happened then?
Yeah.
Because they would have totally lost the surprise factor.
Yeah.
And
all that
they
planning would have been down the drain.
Yeah, all the money, all the planning would have been gone. You would have still had mass casualties for basically no gain.
No gain and a major loss. Because, I mean, if D-Day fails, then it gives Churchill the ammunition he needs to continue the attack through, as he put it, the soft underbelly approach, as opposed to going through France. I don't think if D-Day fails, they don't go through France again.
No.
That's a squash thing.
Even if they wanted to, I don't think they could, because, like we said, the element of surprise would be gone. So obviously, the Germans are going to fortify even more.
Yeah, they're going to fortify even more.
If you couldn't do it the first time, it would be even harder to try to do it a second time.
Yeah, and not only that, but the Russians are going to be so much further ahead. You're marching against the clock, because then you're going to be going, well, the Russians are going to get to Berlin, and we're not even going to be on the mainland yet. So they're going to go through Italy, and that's going to be where the main force is maneuvered, is through Italy and then up through there. And they're not even going to bother with France. They're going to go straight for Germany because they're going to have no choice. If D-Day fails, they don't have enough time to build up again and try again through that course. They just don't. And Churchill will be able to sit there and go, "I was right." Any attempt at that those defenses is futile. Look at how much planning went into the last time, and we failed. They would not go through France. It just wouldn't happen. If D-Day fails, that's it.
And even if they wanted to, they wouldn't be able to get support for it, because everybody's going to say, well, you saw what happened last time. Do you want to go get thousands, hundreds of thousands of people killed? Just to get pushed back into the sea again.
Mm-hmm. And, it would be D-up, but on a grander scale. And it just, I don't see them going back through France. If D-Day fails, that's it. They're done. And I mean, we sit there and go, well, there would have to be a major cluster F for that to happen. And not really. The Allies got very lucky. There was a few things that happened that really helped the Allies. One of them being Rommel wasn't on the main lines. Rommel was back at home. If Rommel had been there when they launched the attack, it may not have gone as well, because what helped the Allies was the German counterattack was stalled, because nobody was going to wake up Dolphy, as we like to say.
Oh yeah.
Nobody was going to wake him up at 2 a.m. and going, we got a problem.
Excuse me, boss. There's something you may want to take a look at.
Yeah, remember how we said they were coming through Calais? Apparently we were wrong. So nobody wanted to wake him up with bad news. And the tank divisions were not allowed to move without his authorization.
Yeah.
Rommel would not have waited.
Yeah.
Rommel had a history of...
he would have
seen... Rommel would have just moved the tanks, moved them now. If he has anything to say about it, he can come talk to me. Right? Yeah. Rommel had that kind of attitude where Rommel would have been, no, you're moving the panzer units now, and if we push them into the sea before he wakes up, he won't say anything about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'm sure he wouldn't be too upset if he did that.
No.
Even if he didn't know about it to start with.
Yeah, so Rommel not being at the front plays a major role, and a lot more of a role than what we think, because all the commanders, I mean, they were sitting there when the paratroopers started dropping. I mean, there was panzer units with like 350 tanks or so idling. Like, the engines were running, they were ready to go, and they couldn't move without authorization from Berlin. Yeah. So the tankers were literally sitting there on their idling tanks, smoking a cigarette, waiting for the commands to come through. Yeah, and nobody was willing to wake up Alfie.
Paratroopers are just dropping. They're like, "Hey, look at
that! Ain't that a biatch?" Yeah. So if Rommel had been at the front, the response of the Germans would have been a lot faster. Yeah. And this, it could have gone badly real quick. I mean, you look at Omaha Beach. That didn't go to plan either. And that was with all of the, delays and everything. And it just... all it takes is one thing to really go wrong in a major way. If they wouldn't have been able to hold the bridges, if they would have, if the paratroopers missions would have failed, just the paratroopers missions fail.
And that was enough of a shit show on its own.
And that was enough of a shit show on its own. I mean, that didn't go to plan at all.
And luckily, they still pulled it off, even though it started out so badly.
Yeah, well, and one reason they were able to pull it off was because the Germans were in disarray, because for the first 6 to 8 hours of the attack, they weren't getting the commands they needed to retaliate.
Yeah.
So, there was a major delay on the German side in response, which, I mean, I'm not saying it was a cakewalk, but it could have been a lot worse. If the panzer units were ordered to move at like 2 a.m, because by 2 a.m, they knew what was going on. By 2 a.m, they knew, because they had gotten attacked on multiple fronts by the paratroopers. And they had a pretty good idea, but they weren't allowed to move.
Yeah.
They had to wait for authorization from Berlin. If they hadn't waited for authorization from Berlin, that could have ended a lot worse than what it was. And it's not too much of a stretch to say D-Day fails.
And it's funny because, like you said, that's really one of the main reasons, as you said, I think it worked at all. Everything you read and everything you see in history things is, it was because they convinced them that we were going to attack at Calais, not at Normandy.
That helped.
I mean, that did help. But at the same time, once they realized what was going on, if they had called in all their reserves, they would have figured out pretty quick, like you said, wait a minute, they're not going there, they're going here. Mm-hmm. Let's move everything over here. And like you said, they just weren't allowed to do it.
No, they weren't allowed to move. But
Rommel
like
was
I said,
Berlin, Dalby was asleep.
Yeah, so if Rommel had been on the front lines, I think D-Day changes.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, Utah Beach, they were able to get in pretty well because the Germans had, let's say, not as fanatical troops on the main line. But Omaha probably would have, I mean, as it was, there was talks of moving the remainder of the troops after the first wave went in to the British landings.
Yeah, because Omaha was going so bad.
Yeah, and they weren't going to move them in anymore because they were just losing boatloads of troops one after the other because the bombing raids hadn't done their job. Which is still argued about today. Bombers say they did their job and the ground troops are going, there wasn't a bomb for 100 feet. You killed a whole bunch of cows. And the bombers are going, no, we killed Germans. No, you killed cows. Right? So that argument still rages to this day. And there were so many points within that landing that just one more thing go wrong and that's it. It's checkout time. And I mean, even after they get the beachhead, then Mother Nature deals them a blow. So if they had gone, if it had been worse, especially on the American landings, if it had been worse than what it historically was, and they were getting pushed back from the Germans even more, when that natural storm moved in, if it had taken out all of those, if it had taken all of the docks out instead of just two, and damaged the third, historically it took out 2 out of 3 pylons, and which were the long mobile docks that they moved over. A storm rolls in, I think day 2 of D-Day, day 2 or day 3, and it wipes out 2 of them. So that they only had one operating harbor, artificial harbor. If all 3 of those are knocked out in the storm, and the Germans are having a more coordinated response, I don't know.
Yeah, because they would have had to just stop moving men and equipment in.
Yeah.
So they'd have basically been stuck with what's already there. And if the Germans have already got a more coordinated offensive, then
defense, you could be looking at Dunkirk II.
Yeah, they would easily, or well, not easily, but they would have a much better chance of pushing them back to the sea, and there would be nothing that they could do to get reinforcements or anything.
No. Because the D-Day, a lot of D-Day hinged on those artificial harbors. And if the artificial harbors get taken out completely in that storm, if that storm was just a little bit worse, even with D-Day going off the way it did, if it wasn't for the fact that we could get the supplies that we could get to the men at the front, we would have had to stop. We would have just had a holding pattern waiting for more supplies and armor. That would have given a regroup time. And then we would have ended up either having more body count pushing into France because there would have been able to be lines of defense set up. And speed would have been completely toast. And, I mean, getting through the hedgerows was bad enough. Never mind if they had, like, a week to fortify.
Yeah. That's the problem with doing an amphibious landing and having to bring everything with you. All that the Germans had to do was move stuff over country or through country, and like you said, we were having to bring everything over by ship. So they could have very easily overrun us if we got stuck in a holding pattern waiting on supplies.
Supplies, yeah. It would have been
waiting on ammunition and men and armor and stuff like that. So you're just kind of sitting there idling like, oh, we can't really go much farther. We're going to run out of gas.
And
where's the gas at?
Oh, yeah, and then you're doing airdrops of ammunition to keep your troops that you've got there in place, which means you're taking aircraft away from strategic bombing raids because they've got to now fly in supplies instead of bombs. So, yeah, it could have gone tits up real quick. And then coming out of it, and this is, I think, the most interesting thing to think about, is how that would have changed the war. Because if D-Day fails, and it's an utter failure, and the Allies are forced back to Britain, I don't see them going, like I said before, I don't see them going back through France.
No.
Churchill's going to be absolutely sworn against it because he had Dieppe, which was an absolute clusterfuck, and now D-Day, absolute clusterfuck. And he'd been a strong proponent of, no, you don't go through France. France is too built up. There's no way. And there was a lot of people that agreed with him up until D-Day that you're just not getting through those defenses. They built that up. It's impenetrable. You're not anything going up against that is a suicide mission.
Yeah.
United States and Russia were the ones that were pushing for, you get into France now. If D-Day fails, I don't think they'd be able to convince. Churchill would be very easily I told you so. Not again. We go through Italy.
Well, and if you failed on the first attempt, they're going to already be looking for that, and they're going to fortify even more. So if it went tits up on the first try, it's going to be twice as bad or more on a second try, because they're going to be looking for that, and they're going to fortify even more than what they already had.
Yeah, and if you think about it this way, Dieppe happens in mid-42. D-Day happens in 44. So that's at least 2 years build up. You don't have another 2 years.
No.
You don't have another 2 years to build up a secondary landing force. You just don't. And they need to get into, fighting the Germans quick, because the Russians are starting to make their headway and they're starting to make their gains, and they're already on their way to Berlin. So we're looking at 44. And then do the American people still have the support? Because now they're looking at another 2 years before you're going to be able to turn your focus towards Japan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because everything is put off. Like, yeah, they're making strides in the Pacific, but the Pacific is secondary to the Western Front. Germany first, Japan second. It was always the way it was going to go. But do you start losing support for that idea if D-Day fails?
I think they would. And like you said, that I think they would divert more towards the Pacific campaign.
Mm-hmm.
To go harder against Japan and still put stuff towards the war in mainland Europe, but again, I think it would go more towards Churchill's idea, which is the soft underbelly, where Churchill would then have the high ground, because he would just go, I told you, going into France is suicide. Look at all the armor, look at all the men, look at all the resources we lost doing D-Day. Doing it your way. We did it your way. Now it's time you guys listen to us. We do it my way. Yeah. And we go through the soft underbelly. Or we let Russia take Germany out. Yeah, that was another thought I had, is would they not just pull back to England and basically just protect England, and kind of let the Russians do the dirty work, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Essentially, yeah. But to see the risk with that is, the United States didn't exactly want Russia to have most of, Europe.
Yeah, I was, before doing this, we knew we was going. Last time we talked that we were going to do this about D-Day. I was looking at some things online, and something that I hadn't heard before but struck me was people were saying, "Well, we weren't really saving Europe from the Germans. We were keeping Europe from being Red Europe."
Yeah.
We, like you said, we didn't want Russia to basically turn all of Europe into Russia.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure we could get back.
The race for Berlin. There was a reason there was a race for Berlin. We ended up allowing the Russians to take Berlin, and then we ended up kicking ourselves in the ass for it for years. But
yeah,
it was looked upon basically, well, let them do it, and we don't lose any troops. But at the same time, I don't think if D-Day fails, if that fails, I don't see another. They're definitely not doing another landing for another 2 years, because it's going to take that amount of time to regroup and recoup all of that, the resources that were lost. Because if you think about it, the pullout is going to be just an absolute clusterfuck. If they have to, because I mean, as it was historically, it was a cluster F. Because once that storm rolled through, I mean, that sunk ships, that destroyed some of the harbors. And now if you're trying to do a pullout when that storm hits, right?
Yeah, it just went from bad to worse.
To absolute worse, right? So depending on when you're doing the pullout, when you figure, like, if Rommel's there, absolute worst case scenario, Rommel's there. The panzers move in before the Allies are ready for the panzers to move in. And they're being forced to the sea before they've got the artificial harbors set up and ready to go. And that storm moves in while they're trying to get soldiers off the coast. They're not able to just pull back and then come back because they've got no beachfront. They're done.
Yeah, they're just going to sit there and be overrun.
Yeah,
basically.
And then
it's all basically a total loss at that point. Everything's lost.
Absolutely. And I don't see Churchill. They had to drag him kicking and screaming to get him to agree to D-Day the first time. Because Churchill was hell-bent determined they were not going to do a French landing. Because as far as he was concerned, it was just not going to end well. The very fact that it did shock Churchill pleasantly, but it shocked Churchill. Yeah. Churchill, there are some people, there are some documentaries that state Churchill went to sleep that night thinking he was going to have to tell the British people that a whole bunch of their fathers, sons were dead.
Yeah.
Because he did not have faith in a French landing. He fought tooth and nail for that. He postponed it and postponed it and postponed it. And in Britain especially, there was a major no, you just can't. The fortifications are too hard. What the hell? This isn't going to work. This is suicide. The Americans were the ones that were really pushing for the French landing, because that was the quickest way to Berlin, was through France. Yeah. However, if D-Day fails, I don't see them getting support for that again.
No, and then they have to go the long way around, the way Churchill wanted to do it to start with.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, the Russians just keep steamrolling, and there's no way then we could have caught up.
No. It would have been a race to Berlin a totally different way. With a lot more obstacles in your way. Yeah. And now the Germans know exactly where you're coming. Right? They can reshore up their defenses on the one side. They know you're coming up through Italy. and they just bog you down, and you almost have like an old World War I Western Front.
And it also is interesting to think about if D-Day had failed, and like you said, then okay, if you go the long way around and they know which way you're coming, well, at the same time they could have put more against Russia. So how would that front have went?
Well, and also without
everything all the way around.
Oh, it absolutely would have. If the Allies failed to land at D-Day, because what a lot of people don't understand is, with D-Day a success, Germany was officially fighting a two-front war.
Yeah.
So they had to divert troops from Russia to the Western Front. Whereas if D-Day fails, they don't have to focus on the Western Front as much.
Yeah.
And they can throw more materiel towards Russia than what they could have historically. So it's hard to say, because D-Day failing changes the outlook of that war so much, which is why D-Day had to succeed. It had to, because if it didn't, then the war we know may have been able to get Britain to the negotiating table, as much as Churchill would have hated that one.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, once you've lost all those men and equipment, and you're thinking, well, do we have 2 more years to build this stuff up again? No, we don't.
No.
Maybe we just go to the negotiating table and save our own ass, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you leave us alone, we're going to stay over here. And
I think also, like I say, support for Japan first, Germany second.
Yeah.
Especially in the States. I think that would, I think getting support for more troops for a Western landing would be hard.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, we would have been so shell shocked from what happened if D-Day failed that we wouldn't be ready to send all those men and equipment back over there to try to do something like that again, or maybe even to assist them in the European campaign at all.
Yeah,
or very little,
very little, and it would have been
divert more
full focus
to
the Pacific. Yeah. Because I don't think the American people would have waited another 2 years for them to be able to fully focus on Japan.
No.
Because I don't see it.
They were already not very happy about
not
putting the full focus on Japan anyway.
Yeah. And Stalin would have gone absolutely apeshit. Because Stalin, the other thing you have to consider is Stalin had already threatened that if they didn't land in France and open up a second front, he was going to the peace table. He had already threatened that more than once back in 1943. So if D-Day, which is this big thing that they've been promising Stalin for years now, for a good portion of 2 years, that, we're coming in on the Western Front. Well, if D-Day fails, Stalin is in a position where he's still the only one fighting the Germans. And now his big relief that he thought he was going to get doesn't happen.
Yeah. Now he knows it's either not coming at all, or if it comes, it's going to be a long time before it comes.
Yeah. So he may
like you said, hey, we'll go to the peace table.
Yeah.
Divide some of this stuff up and call it a day.
Call it a day, yeah.
And then, like you said, England goes to the peace table just to save their own ass.
Well,
Leave us alone.
As long as Churchill's in power, I don't see that happening.
You don't think he would? He's
Churchill
too hard-headed?
No, Churchill was too proud. That would not have happened. Churchill, no, not under Churchill. But then again, you get an election, you get another person in power, you never know. I mean, and as it is,
especially if we pull our support,
yeah,
and go 100% against the Japanese, and then especially if Russia goes to the peace table, well, then that just leaves England.
Because, I mean, if you think about it this way, historically, Churchill loses the 45 election. Historically. So they win World War II, they get out of World War II, and Churchill loses the election.
Yeah.
Historically. Just in real timeline. So now picture that without D-Day succeeding. The pressure on Churchill would go through the roof. So D-Day succeeding was something that had to happen. It had to. And luckily for us, all the saints were kind of on our side. There were a few slow, but Rommel not being there was a major thing. If Rommel had been there, I don't think Rommel would have waited for commands from from Berlin, because he never did before. So why he'd do it now, I don't know.
Yeah, and then you have all these panzer divisions and reserve troops pushed up.
Yeah,
and I think with all the extra men and machinery, it would basically have been impossible to keep your foothold in France.
Yeah, especially
I think they would have drove them back to the sea.
Especially hindsight knowing that storm is like day 3.
Yeah.
Right. The traditionally they were able to survive because they had a foothold. Now, if they don't have that foothold, that they don't have the beaches secured, and that storm rolls in, that's a good 24 hours without sport. Yeah. At least. And then if that storm's just a little bit stronger and it takes out everything that you've built up to now, as far as the artificial harbors are concerned,
yeah, it would be impossible to rebound from that.
Yeah.
Especially without already having a foothold.
Yeah, it would be an absolute cluster F, and it would not be looked upon the same. But it's a very scary but interesting thing to look at. So, in conclusion, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and please do leave a comment. Let me know if you guys are liking the what ifs. I know some people had wanted the what if series, so let me know if you'd like us to continue doing these. I have fun doing this because then you don't have to do a lot of research. You just kind of look at it and go, what happens if this happens?
You know how much I love research, so I like it too.
Oh yeah,
because you can just kind of shoot from the hip, like, oh, this, and it's a nice mental exercise.
Absolutely. All right, Han, tell the people where they can find you.
Everybody, youtube.com/Honstar. I do fun live streams every Sunday, 11 p.m. Eastern. Either Jackbox Game Night, name that tune, every now and then an interview with the creator or something like that. The main thing is show up on my channel at 11 p.m. Eastern Time on Sundays. Something fun's going to be going on. You'll have a good time. YouTube, Twitter and Instagram at HonstarYT is also where you can find me.
Awesome. And for me, I'm either here on Rambling Canuck or History with R&R. Whole bunch of wonderful programs there. And karaoke every Saturday night. So, till next time, take her easy, folks.